1 second later, the stranger who knocked at midnight the town of Ravenshade slept in uneasy silence. The kind of silence that holds its breath before a storm. Midnight had just struck, the church bell tolling 12 times, echoing through the empty streets like a warning no one wanted to hear. Behind drawn curtains, people dreamed, unaware that their night was about to splinter into terror. At the edge of town, in a weathered house with peeling paint, Claire sat awake. She couldn't sleep. Something gnawed at her nerves. The clock ticked too loudly, the wind sighed too heavily. She wrapped her shawl tighter, trying to convince herself she was imagining things. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps at the door. They did not belong in the quiet night. They did not belong at all. Claire froze, her breath caught halfway in her chest. Midnight visitors were unheard of in Ravenshade. For a moment she prayed she had misheard. But then the knock came again, slower this time, heavier, deliberate. She crept to the window, parting the curtain with trembling fingers. The street outside was empty, bathed in the pale glow of the moon. Yet at her door, she saw a figure. Tall, motionless, cloaked in black. Its face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. And its posture was unnatural, too still, like a shadow nailed to the earth. Claire's first instinct was to scream. But the sound died in her throat. Instead, she whispered to herself, "Go away!" But the stranger did not move. The knock came again, though she hadn't seen his hand rise. Across the street, old Mr. Dalton stirred awake. He peered through his cracked blinds, frowning. He too saw the figure at Claire's door. For a moment he considered calling the sheriff. But when he reached for the phone, the line was dead, only static hissing in his ear. Inside, Claire backed away from the door, her pulse pounding. She considered running upstairs. But something about the silence of the house felt like a trap. Every creak of the floor seemed too loud, every shadow too deep. She clutched the poker from the fireplace, her knuckles white. The knocking stopped. Relief washed over her like a fragile tide. She dared to hope the stranger had left. But then came the voice. Low, calm, almost polite. "Let me in." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even loud. But the words filled every corner of the house, as though spoken from inside her walls. Claire's grip on the poker trembled. She whispered, "No." The silence stretched again. Then, to her horror, the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, testingly. As though the lock itself were being persuaded. She rushed forward, slamming the deadbolt down, her breath ragged. "Let me in," the voice repeated, softer now, almost coaxing, like a lullaby. From across the street, Mr. Dalton staggered back from his window. His chest ached with panic. But when he looked again, the figure was gone. Only the empty porch remained. He sagged into his chair, convincing himself it was just his old eyes playing tricks. But inside the house, Claire knew better. Because as she backed away from the locked door, she heard it. A new sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing not from outside, but from upstairs. Her blood turned to ice. She lived alone. The poker clattered from her hand as she stumbled backward, her eyes darting to the staircase. The shadows at the top seemed thicker now, shifting as if something waited just beyond her sight. She tried to scream, but a whisper beat her to it. "You should have opened the door." Claire's legs trembled as she stumbled back into the living room, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her body refused to obey. The silence of the house pressed against her like a suffocating blanket. She forced herself toward the back door, clutching at the handle. But it wouldn't budge. The bolt slid back, yet the wood stayed rigid, as though something far heavier than wood and nails barred her way. She pounded it with her fists, panic bubbling into sobs. Upstairs, the footsteps moved again. Slow, patient. Each one stretched like a blade drawn across her nerves. Dust stirred from the old floorboards above, drifting down like falling ash. Claire snatched up a candle from the mantel and lit it with shaking hands. The flame flickered wildly, casting long, nervous shadows across the walls. She whispered, "Please, please just go." The air shifted. The house groaned as if taking a breath. And then came the whisper again, drifting down the staircase like smoke. "You already let me in." Her candle guttered. Across the street, Mr. Dalton couldn't shake the image of that shadow at the door. Against his better judgment, he slipped into his boots and stepped outside. The night air was heavy, unnaturally still. No dogs barked, no crickets sang. The silence pressed so hard it made his ears ring. He shuffled toward Claire's house, each step slower than the last. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn. But as he reached the porch, a chill swept through him. He lifted his fist to knock, hesitated. Then froze. The doorknob was turning from the inside. "Claire!" he croaked, his voice cracking. But no one answered. Inside, Claire crouched by the stairs, clutching her candle. The footsteps had stopped. The silence above stretched so long she began to doubt she'd heard anything at all. Perhaps she was imagining it. Perhaps the fear had cracked her mind. And then she saw it. At the top of the stairs, barely illuminated by the flicker of her candle, stood the figure. The same tall silhouette she had seen on her porch, hat shadowing its face, shoulders impossibly broad. But now it was inside, unmoving, watching. Claire's scream tore through the house, raw and desperate. "Mr. Dalton stumbled back, his heart seizing as the sound reached him through the door. He twisted the knob in a frenzy, pounding on the wood. "Claire! Claire!" The figure didn't move. It only tilted its head, as though amused. The shadows around it seemed to ripple, stretching down the staircase step by step. Claire bolted, racing toward the kitchen. Her candle blew out mid-stride, plunging her into suffocating dark. She reached for the counter, fumbling blindly, her fingers finding the handle of a knife. Behind her, the voice murmured again, "You shouldn't have refused me." The front door burst open as Mr. Dalton stumbled inside, flashlight trembling in his grip. The beam cut across the hallway, but where Claire pointed, shrieking, there was nothing. No figure, only the empty staircase, and the echo of his own pounding heart. "Claire!" he gasped, rushing to her side. She clutched his arm, sobbing, knife still in her hand. He was here. He was right there. Dalton's flashlight swept the house again. But the rooms were bare. He swallowed hard, doubt and dread tangling in his chest. "You need rest," he whispered, though he didn't believe it. But even as he said it, the beam caught something on the wall. A smear of black, wet and glistening, like ink dragged by invisible fingers. It pulsed once before sinking into the wallpaper, leaving nothing but silence behind. Claire shuddered violently. "He's not gone," she whispered. "He's already inside." The house felt smaller now, the walls drawing closer, the air heavier with every second. "Mr. Dalton gripped his flashlight like a weapon, its trembling beam darting across corners that seemed too deep, too wide for a modest home. Claire clung to him, her eyes darting at every flicker of shadow. "Stay here," Dalton whispered, though his voice cracked with fear. He crept toward the staircase, each step echoing louder than it should have, as though the house were amplifying his movements. Claire wanted to scream for him to stop, but terror glued her throat shut. Halfway up, Dalton paused. Something cold dripped onto his shoulder. He lifted his light upward. The ceiling above him sagged, black liquid seeping through the cracks. The beam caught movement, a ripple, like something crawling within the wood itself. His breath stuttered. Then the whisper came again, wrapping around them both. 1 second later, everything changes. The words didn't come from the staircase. They came from every wall, every floorboard, every breath of air. The house itself was speaking. Dalton stumbled back down the steps, his face pale. "We need to leave." Now, they ran for the front door. But when Dalton yanked it open, the world outside was gone. No street, no houses, no sky. Only blackness stretched beyond the porch, a suffocating void that pulsed like a living thing. Claire's scream echoed into the nothing. But the sound was swallowed instantly. Dalton slammed the door shut, his chest heaving. "This isn't real," he muttered. But the terror in his eyes betrayed him. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost spread across the windows, delicate patterns of ice spelling out words they couldn't ignore. "Let me in." Claire collapsed to her knees, her tears freezing on her cheeks. "Why us? Why here?" she whispered. The shadows thickened, pooling in the corners until they formed a shape. The figure again, tall and broad, its hat brim low, its face hidden in impossible darkness. This time it stood in the middle of the living room. Dalton raised his flashlight, but the beam bent away. But though light itself refused to touch the stranger. "Stay back," he shouted. But his voice broke with hopelessness. The figure didn't move forward. It simply raised its hand and pointed, first at Dalton, then at Claire. Dalton charged, swinging the flashlight like a club. But as he reached the figure, his body froze mid-motion, suspended in the air as though time had stopped. His face twisted with pain, his mouth open in a silent cry. Then, slowly, impossibly, his body folded inward, collapsing into the shadow until nothing remained. Claire screamed his name, her hands clawing at the air. The figure turned its faceless head toward her. The walls pulsed with whispers, dozens of voices now, children, women, men, all overlapping in a chorus of command. "Let us in!" She stumbled backward until her shoulders hit the wall. The knife clattered from her grip. She tried to pray, but the words fled her mind, leaving only her sobs. The figure bent slightly, as though bowing, as it melted into the floor, leaving only the silence. The lights flickered on. The frost vanished from the windows. Outside, the street returned, the world whole again. Ravenshade looked peaceful, quiet, ordinary. Claire collapsed, shaking violently, her eyes darting to the door. But there was no knock now, no figure on the porch. Only her empty house, her shattered sanity. And the echo of a single phrase burned into her mind. 1 second later, everything had changed. And midnight would come again.